Investigators uncovered nearly 20,000 images of child abuse material, and the man behind it was a trusted father, a neighbor, and a friend. But this shocking discovery didn't begin in a courtroom or a police station. It began with a 5-year-old whispering a secret at a birthday party. The story opens in the most ordinary of places, a suburban neighborhood in Florida, where families gather for a child's birthday party. The air is filled with laughter, balloons bob in the breeze, and children run from house to house, playing games and sharing cake. It is the kind of scene that radiates innocence, the kind of moment parents cherish, believing their children are safe among friends. But beneath the surface of this celebration, something darker was unfolding. A 5-year-old girl, dressed in her pajamas later that evening, turned to her mother with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "I have a secret, but I can't tell you." Her mother, sensing the weight of those words, pressed gently. "There are no secrets between Mommy and you," she reassured. The child hesitated, cried harder, and finally began to reveal something that would shatter the illusion of safety in this quiet community. The secret was not about spilled juice or a broken toy. It was about being taken into a room by a man she trusted, a neighbor, a father of children she often played with. She described being shown disturbing images, told not to tell anyone, and left feeling frightened and confused. For a 5-year-old to articulate such details, investigators knew immediately that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a disclosure that demanded urgent attention. When deputies arrived, they parked discreetly down the street, careful not to draw attention to the home. They understood the gravity of the situation. If the allegations were true, confronting the suspect prematurely could jeopardize the investigation. Instead, they focused on the child, listening carefully as she described what had happened. Her words painted a picture that was both heartbreaking and chilling. The mother's world collapsed in that moment. What had begun as a joyful day ended in fear and disbelief. She realized that her daughter's innocence had been violated, not by a stranger in a distant place, but by someone who lived just down the street. Someone who had been welcomed into their circle of trust. The betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. For the deputies, the challenge was clear. They needed to balance compassion with procedure, ensuring the child felt safe while also preserving evidence. They collected the swimsuit the girl had worn at the party, knowing it might hold forensic clues. They reassured the mother, but inside they were already preparing for the possibility that this case would expand far beyond a single allegation. The child's testimony was consistent, detailed, and deeply troubling. She named the man, Christopher Thompson. A father, a neighbor, a man who worked for the local utilities department. To the outside world he was ordinary. To the children in the neighborhood he was familiar. But to investigators he was now a suspect in one of the most disturbing cases they had ever encountered. This was not the kind of story anyone expected to emerge from a birthday party. Yet, as the deputies listened, they realized that the secret whispered by a 5-year-old was about to unravel a hidden life of deception and exploitation. And the more they dug, the more they would uncover. A history stretching back years involving multiple victims, and a collection of evidence so vast it would shock even seasoned investigators. The hook of this case is not just the crime itself, but the way it was revealed. A child's courage to speak, despite fear and confusion, set in motion an investigation that would expose a predator hiding in plain sight. It is a reminder that sometimes the most devastating truths emerge from the smallest voices, voices that refuse to stay silent. As the night wore on, deputies prepared to take the next step. They would need to confront Christopher Thompson, gather evidence, and protect the children in the community. But for now, the focus remained on the little girl who had dared to share her secret. Her words were the spark that ignited a case far larger than anyone could have imagined. And this was only the beginning. What investigators would uncover next would transform a neighborhood's worst nightmare into a national case, and prove that sometimes the monsters we fear are the ones living right next door. The birthday party had ended hours earlier. The children had gone home, the cake was half-eaten, and the decorations were beginning to sag. But inside one home, a mother was facing the most terrifying moment of her life. Her 5-year-old daughter, normally cheerful and carefree, was crying as she tried to explain something she didn't fully understand. At first, the mother thought it was just the child's imagination. Kids invent stories, they exaggerate, they confuse dreams with reality. But the way her daughter spoke, the pauses, the trembling voice, the insistence that she had a secret, felt different. This wasn't a game. This was something real. The mother pressed gently, reassuring her child that she could say anything, that there were no secrets between them. And slowly, painfully, the truth began to emerge. Her daughter described being led into a room by a man she trusted. She said he shut the door, showed her pictures of younger girls like me, and told her not to tell anyone. For a 5-year-old to articulate such details was alarming. Children at that age often struggle to describe events clearly, but here was a child recounting specific actions, words, and images. It was enough to make her mother's stomach turn. She realized immediately that this was not something she could handle alone. She picked up the phone and called 911. Deputies from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office responded quickly. But they didn't rush to the suspect's house. Instead, they parked discreetly down the street, careful not to alert anyone. They knew that if the allegations were true, confronting the man too soon could compromise the investigation. Their priority was the child. Inside the home, the deputies sat down with the little girl. They spoke softly, asking simple questions, trying not to frighten her. "Do you have any friends in the neighborhood?" one deputy asked. The girl nodded. "Yes." He shut the door. The deputies leaned in, listening carefully. The girl described inappropriate touching. She named the man, Christopher Thompson. He wasn't a stranger. He was a neighbor, the father of children she often played with. The deputies asked if he had shown her anything else. She said yes, pictures of girls her age. She mentioned Georgia, a trip where she had seen similar images. The deputies took note. This wasn't just a single incident. It might be part of a larger pattern. When the interview ended, the deputies stepped outside to discuss the situation. They knew the gravity of what they had just heard. A 5-year-old had disclosed abuse, named her abuser, and described explicit images. This wasn't vague or confused testimony. It was specific, consistent, and deeply troubling. Meanwhile, the child's father was in another room, overwhelmed with emotion. He was banging on the walls, panicking, unable to process what was happening. The deputies tried to calm him down, reminding him that his daughter needed him to stay strong. But the weight of the allegations was crushing. The deputies collected the child's swimsuit from the party as evidence. They arranged for a forensic medical exam, knowing that physical evidence could be crucial. They reassured the mother, but inside they were already preparing for what might come next, confronting Christopher Thompson. For the mother, the nightmare was only beginning. She had trusted her neighbor. Her daughter had played in his house, laughed with his children, and spent time in what she thought was a safe environment. Now that trust was shattered. She realized that the man she had waved to in passing, the man she had seen mowing his lawn, might be hiding a monstrous secret. The deputies knew they had to move carefully. Allegations like these are delicate. Children can be vulnerable to suggestion, and investigators must ensure that every detail is handled with precision. But in this case, the child's testimony was strong. She had described actions, words, and images that no 5-year-old should know. As the night wore on, the deputies prepared their next steps. They would need to locate Thompson, interview him, and begin building a case. But they also knew that this was bigger than one allegation. The mention of Georgia, the reference to images, the possibility of past incidents, all of it pointed to something far more disturbing. The disclosure had cracked open a door. Behind it lay a hidden world of deception, exploitation, and betrayal. And as investigators would soon discover, the secret whispered by a 5-year-old was only the beginning of a case that would stretch back years and involve multiple victims. What investigators uncovered next would not only confirm the child's story, but reveal a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. Soon after, detectives tracked down Christopher Thompson, a 44-year-old utility worker. At first he denied everything. He claimed confusion, insisted nothing happened, and even suggested he was being set up. But when pressed, he asked for a lawyer. To his wife Charlotte, that moment was devastating. She believed only someone hiding something would shut down instead of fighting to clear their name. The morning after the child's disclosure, deputies moved quickly. They had a name, a description, and a disturbing account that demanded immediate action. Christopher Thompson was not a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was a neighbor, a father, and a man who worked for the county utilities department. His life appeared ordinary, but investigators suspected something far darker beneath the surface. They found him at work, dressed in his uniform, surrounded by co-workers who had no idea what was about to unfold. The deputies approached calmly, asking him to step down from his equipment. At first he seemed puzzled, even casual. "What's up?" he asked, unaware of the storm gathering around him. The deputies didn't explain much. They kept their words vague, telling him only that he needed to come with them. Thompson pressed for answers, but they held back. They knew that revealing too much too soon could compromise the investigation. Still, the tension was palpable. His co-workers looked on, whispering, wondering what could possibly warrant such a serious response. As Thompson was escorted to a vehicle, he muttered under his breath, "I'm just so over this. I feel like I'm being thrown into something I don't even understand." His words reflected confusion, but also a hint of defensiveness. He wanted to believe he was the victim of a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, deputies arrived at his home. Charlotte, his wife, answered the door. She was on the phone, distracted, unaware of what was happening. When told she couldn't enter her own home without supervision, she grew anxious. "Is this about my husband?" she asked. The deputies confirmed but offered few details. They explained that a search warrant was being prepared, and that she would need to wait. Charlotte's confusion quickly turned to fear. She had no idea what her husband was accused of, but the seriousness of the situation was clear. Deputies told her that Thompson was being taken to the sheriff's office to speak with detectives. She tried to remain calm, but inside, panic was setting in. At the sheriff's office, Thompson was introduced to Detective Blake and Detective Birch. They read him his Miranda rights, reminding him that he had the option to remain silent. Thompson hesitated. "I just want to know what's going on," he said. The detectives explained that the allegations stemmed from the past weekend, during the birthday party. Thompson recounted the day casually. He said he had taken his 3 children, ages 11, 7, and 5, to the party. He described how the kids played at multiple houses including his own. He mentioned that his wife wasn't there because she was at the hospital with her grandmother. His tone was calm, almost dismissive, as if the day had been nothing more than ordinary family fun. But the detectives pressed further. "Did anything happen with the children yesterday? Why you could possibly be here?" Thompson shook his head. "No," they asked if any of the children had been inside his house. He admitted they had, but insisted it was innocent. "We were doing gymnastics. My girls, my son, and one of the neighbor kids. That's it." The detectives asked if he had ever been alone with one of the children. He denied it. They asked if he had shown any images on his phone. He said the kids sometimes watched YouTube but nothing inappropriate. When pressed about explicit images, he grew defensive. "Oh heck no. No. There's nothing like that on my phone." The detectives revealed that a child had described being taken into a bedroom, the door shut behind them, and shown disturbing videos. Another child corroborated the account, saying they saw Thompson escort the girl into the room. Thompson denied it all. "I don't recall doing that. I don't remember ever having her in my room." As the interview continued, Thompson's composure began to crack. He realized the detectives weren't simply fishing for answers. They had testimony, evidence, and corroboration. His denials grew weaker, his voice more strained. Finally, when confronted with the inconsistencies in his story, he stopped. "I want a lawyer," he said. For Charlotte, that moment was devastating. When told her husband had asked for an attorney, she broke down. "You only say that if you're guilty," she cried. "If you have nothing to hide, you don't shut down. You fight. You clear your name." To her, his silence was confirmation of the worst. The deputies reassured her that they didn't suspect Thompson had harmed his own children. But the allegations involving the neighbor's child were serious, and the evidence was mounting. Charlotte struggled to process it all. Her marriage, her family, her sense of safety, everything was unraveling. Back at the sheriff's office, Thompson sat in silence. He had denied, deflected, and resisted, but now he was facing charges of capital battery on a 5-year-old and showing a minor explicit videos. His phone, he claimed, was broken, dropped in water over the weekend. But investigators weren't convinced. They knew that electronic devices often hold secrets, and they were determined to uncover them. The arrest marked a turning point. What had begun as a whispered secret was now a full-scale investigation. Thompson was no longer just a neighbor or a father. He was a suspect facing charges that could destroy his life and devastate his family. And yet, as serious as the arrest was, investigators knew it was only the beginning. The child's testimony had opened the door, but what they would find behind that door was far worse than anyone imagined. Because hidden inside Thompson's home, on devices he thought were private, was evidence that would reveal the true scope of his crimes, and prove that the nightmare was far from over. Charlotte's world collapsed as investigators explained the allegations. She struggled with how to tell her children their father wasn't coming home. Interviews with the Thompson children revealed no abuse within their own household, but the youngest child confirmed something chilling. Her father had shown her disturbing images. For Charlotte, the marriage was over. For investigators, the case was only beginning. When deputies arrived at the Thompson home, Charlotte was still trying to process what was happening. She had answered the door with her phone pressed to her ear, distracted by an ordinary call, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The deputies asked her to step outside, explaining that she couldn't re-enter her own home without supervision. They told her her husband was being taken to the sheriff's office. They mentioned a search warrant. But they didn't tell her why. Charlotte's confusion quickly turned to fear. She asked again and again what was happening. "Is this about my husband?" she pressed. The deputies confirmed but offered no details. They explained that Thompson was being questioned, that she would need to wait, that she should prepare for investigators to search the house. For Charlotte, the silence was unbearable. She had lived what she described as a boring life. She never imagined waking up to find herself at the center of a criminal investigation. She wanted answers, but none were coming. At the sheriff's office, detectives finally told her the truth. They explained that a child had made allegations against her husband. They said he had shown her disturbing videos, that he had performed acts on her, that another child had corroborated the story. Charlotte's face fell. Her voice trembled. "I wasn't even there. I was at the hospital with my grandmother. How could this be happening?" The detectives reassured her that they didn't suspect Thompson had harmed his own children. But they needed to speak with them to ensure their safety, to rule out any possibility. Charlotte's panic deepened. "How do I tell my kids their father isn't coming home? How do I tell them our marriage is done?" Her father arrived to support her. He tried to comfort her, telling her they would get through it together. But Charlotte couldn't stop crying. She replayed the moment Thompson had asked for a lawyer. To her, that was the breaking point. "You only say that if you're guilty," she insisted. "If you have nothing to hide, you don't shut down. You fight. You clear your name." The investigators began interviewing the Thompson children one by one. The 11-year-old son was asked if he felt safe at home, if anyone had ever touched him inappropriately. He said no. The 7-year-old gave similar answers, insisting he had never seen anything inappropriate on a phone or tablet. But when the youngest child was interviewed, her words sent chills through the room. She said her father had shown her something that made her uncomfortable. She described a boy with a bad, weird face. She said she didn't want to see it, that it scared her. For investigators, this was confirmation that Thompson's behavior extended beyond the neighbor's child. Charlotte's despair deepened. She realized that her husband's actions had touched her own family, that her children had been exposed to things they should never have seen. She felt betrayed, devastated, and powerless. The detectives tried to reassure her. They explained that the investigation was ongoing, that they were gathering evidence, that they would protect her children. But Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that her life was over. Her marriage was shattered. Her children's innocence had been stolen. Her family's name would be dragged through the mud. For investigators, Charlotte's breakdown was a reminder of the human cost of these crimes. They saw it often. Families blindsided by the revelation that someone they loved and trusted was hiding a dark secret. But each case carried its own weight, its own devastation. The interviews confirmed what investigators already suspected. Thompson's actions were not isolated. They were part of a larger pattern. The children's testimony, combined with the neighbor's disclosure, painted a picture of a man who had been hiding his true nature for years. Charlotte's words echoed in the detectives' minds. "You only say that if you're guilty." To her, Thompson's silence was proof. To investigators, it was another piece of the puzzle. The family was torn apart. The children were confused, frightened, and unsure of what would happen next. Charlotte was devastated, struggling to hold herself together. And Thompson was sitting in a cell, facing charges that would change his life forever. But as painful as this chapter was, investigators knew the worst was yet to come. The search warrant was about to uncover evidence that would confirm the allegations beyond doubt, and reveal the true scope of Thompson's crimes. Because hidden inside the Thompson home were secrets far darker than anyone imagined. Secrets that would prove this was not just a case of suspicion, but a case of undeniable guilt. A search warrant uncovered what no one could have imagined. On an SD card inside Thompson's home were images of neighborhood children, clothes UPS taken without their knowledge. And then came the most damning discovery: nearly 20,000 files of child abuse material spanning years, involving victims as young as 13 and younger. Official records revealed a disturbing history dating back to 2010, including incidents in department stores and family trips. The Thompson home looked ordinary from the outside. A modest suburban house, the kind you'd pass without a second thought. But inside, investigators suspected secrets were hidden in plain sight. With a search warrant signed by a judge, deputies entered carefully, knowing that what they found could make or break the case. They began with the obvious: computers, tablets, phones. Thompson had claimed his phone was broken, dropped in water, but investigators knew better than to take his word. Electronic devices often hold the truth that suspects try to bury. As they combed through the home, one deputy found an SD card tucked away among personal belongings. At first glance it seemed harmless, just another piece of digital storage. But when they opened it, the contents were chilling. The card contained images of neighborhood children. Not smiling faces at birthday parties or innocent snapshots of playtime. These were close UPS, invasive photos taken without the children's knowledge. One image focused on a girl's camouflage shorts, zoomed in on her body in ways that made investigators' stomachs turn. They traced the clothing to a 12-year-old neighbor who often visited the Thompson home. When questioned, she said she had never been touched or made uncomfortable. She insisted Thompson had never said anything inappropriate. But the images told another story, a story of voyeurism, of exploitation, of a man who saw children not as friends of his own kids, but as objects to be recorded. And that was only the beginning. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a staggering collection, nearly 20,000 files of child abuse material. The sheer volume was overwhelming. Each file represented stolen innocence, exploitation, and trauma. Many of the victims were 13 or younger. Some were local. Others were unknown. But together they painted a picture of a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years. The files weren't just downloaded material. Some were produced by Thompson himself. He had filmed and photographed children, creating his own library of abuse. The victims had no idea. They thought they were safe, playing in a neighbor's house, laughing with friends. But all the while, Thompson was documenting their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Official records revealed that Thompson's behavior stretched back more than a decade. In 2010, there were reports of him touching and filming juvenile females. In department stores, he had allegedly exposed himself to children. In family trips, suspicions had arisen but never been confirmed. Each incident had faded into the background, dismissed or unresolved. But now, with the evidence in hand, investigators saw the pattern clearly. Thompson wasn't just accused of one act. He was accused of years of predation, of building a hidden world of exploitation while presenting himself as an ordinary father and neighbor. For Charlotte, the discovery was devastating. She had insisted her husband was innocent, that he was being set up, that his phone was broken. But the evidence was undeniable. The SD card, the files, the images, they told a story she could no longer ignore. Her marriage was over. Her family was shattered. And her husband was revealed as someone she no longer recognized. For investigators, the evidence was overwhelming. They had testimony from children, corroboration from multiple witnesses, and now a digital archive that confirmed the allegations beyond doubt. The case had shifted from suspicion to certainty. Thompson would face charges that would ensure he never walked free again. The discovery also raised broader questions. How many victims were there? How many families had been affected without knowing it? How many children had been filmed, photographed, or exploited without realizing? The files suggested a scope far larger than anyone had imagined. As investigators pieced together the evidence, they realized that Thompson's crimes were not isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern, a history of predation that had gone unnoticed for years. The birthday party disclosure had opened the door, but the search warrant had revealed the full extent of the nightmare. The evidence was damning. The SD card, the images, the 20,000 files, all of it pointed to a man who had lived a double life. To his neighbors he was a father, a worker, a friend. To investigators he was a predator who had exploited children for more than a decade. And now, with the evidence in hand, prosecutors were preparing charges that would ensure justice was served. Because what investigators had uncovered was not just a crime, but a lifetime of deception. And the sentence Thompson would face would reflect the gravity of his actions. In the end, Thompson was charged with multiple counts of lewd and lascivious acts, video voyeurism, and federal charges of coercing minors to produce explicit material. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 50 years in state prison, plus 60 years in federal prison, sentences running concurrently. He will spend the rest of his life under supervision, a predator finally exposed by the courage of a child who refused to keep a secret. The courtroom was silent as the charges were read aloud. Christopher Thompson, once seen as an ordinary father and neighbor, now stood accused of crimes that shocked even seasoned investigators. The list was long, each charge more disturbing than the last. Lewd and lascivious acts against children under 12, video voyeurism, coercing minors to produce explicit material, and possession of child abuse imagery. For the families involved, hearing those words was devastating. They had trusted him, welcomed him into their homes, allowed their children to play with his. Now they realized that trust had been betrayed in the worst possible way. Prosecutors presented the evidence. The SD card with voyeuristic images, the 20,000 files of child abuse material, the testimony of children who had been shown disturbing videos. They outlined a history stretching back more than a decade, incidents in department stores, suspicions during family trips, patterns of behavior that had gone unnoticed until now. Thompson sat quietly, his head down, his voice barely audible. He had denied everything during his initial interviews, but the evidence was overwhelming. Faced with the possibility of a trial that would expose every detail, he chose to plead guilty. The judge listened carefully, weighing the charges, the evidence, and the impact on the victims. When the sentence was handed down, it was clear. Thompson would spend the rest of his life behind bars. 50 years in state prison. 60 years in federal prison to run concurrently. And even if he were ever released, he would remain under supervision for the rest of his life. For Charlotte, the sentencing was both a relief and a heartbreak. She had once believed her husband was innocent, that he was being set up, that his phone was broken. But the evidence had shattered those illusions. She realized that the man she had married, the father of her children, had been living a double life. Her marriage was over. Her family was forever changed. For the victims, the sentencing was a step toward justice. Many had been unaware of what Thompson had done until investigators uncovered the files. They had lived their lives in innocence, unaware that their images had been stolen, their privacy violated. Now they knew the truth. And while the scars would remain, the sentencing ensured that Thompson could never harm another child again. The case also served as a reminder of the importance of listening to children. It had all begun with a 5-year-old whispering a secret at a birthday party. Her courage to speak, despite fear and confusion, had set in motion an investigation that exposed a predator and protected countless others. For investigators, the case was one of the most disturbing they had ever encountered. The sheer volume of evidence, the length of Thompson's history, the betrayal of trust, all of it underscored the importance of vigilance, of taking disclosures seriously, of pursuing justice no matter how painful the truth might be. As the courtroom emptied, the families walked away knowing that their lives would never be the same. But they also knew that justice had been served. Thompson was behind bars. His secrets had been exposed. His double life was over. The story of Christopher Thompson is not just a story of crime. It is a story of betrayal, of courage, of justice. It is a reminder that sometimes the worst monsters are the ones hiding in plain sight. And it is a testament to the power of a child's voice, a voice that refused to stay silent, a voice that exposed the truth, a voice that brought justice to light. Because in the end, it was not the investigators, the prosecutors, or the judge who uncovered the truth. It was a 5-year-old child who whispered a secret that revealed a predator, protected countless victims, and ensured that justice would be served. In the quiet of a suburban neighborhood, a predator lived undetected for years. He was a father, a husband, a neighbor, someone trusted, someone ordinary. But behind closed doors, he built a hidden world of exploitation that only came to light because one child found the courage to speak. Christopher Thompson's crimes shattered families, scarred communities, and left a trail of victims who never even knew they had been targeted. His sentencing ensures he will never walk free again, but the damage he caused will echo for a lifetime. This case is a reminder that vigilance matters, that listening to children matters, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths. In the end, justice was served, not because of technology or procedure alone, but because a 5-year-old refused to keep a secret. And that secret exposed a monster hiding in plain sight.